The wall fell at dawn. 7 months of siege, and it ended in the time it takes to boil water. I know because I had water on the fire when the North Tower came down, and it had not yet reached a boil when the first Kaldrmark banners came through the breach. I was in the stillroom, which was the deepest room in the Redkeep of Vharn, and I had a sleeping child against my shoulder, and I stood very still and listened to boots on the stone stair. There were a great many of them. They did not sound like our boots. Our boots had been slow for weeks. These were not slow. The doors opened, and it was not the soldiers I saw first. It was her, the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark, taller than the men around her, ash-brown hair braided back off a face that had not slept, a scar through one brow, and a heavy iron cuff on her forearm that she pressed with her thumb once, slowly, when her eyes found the child.
If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe so the next one can find you. Stay close.
She had come to take a keep and count the dead. She had not expected the dead to be breathing. She looked at the little girl asleep on me, and something went out of her face and something else came into it, and she said 3 words in a voice gone quiet. And I understood, standing there with the water not yet boiled, that my whole life had just been decided by 3 words I did not know how to answer. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Let me back up. 7 months earlier, the war was still a rumor to me. I was 24 years old, and I kept the stillroom and the linen of the Redkeep of Vharn, which is a redstone hold built into the throat of a cliff on the Western March, where the road narrows and the river turns. It is the kind of place that has never mattered in peace, and matters terribly in war, because whoever holds it holds the only bridge for 40 miles. I did not think about bridges. I thought about fever teas and clean bandage linen, and how much willow bark we had left before the frost. I was an omega, which in Vharn meant very little, and in the wider world meant a great deal, and I had learned young to make myself small and useful and hard to notice. My mother had been a shepherd on the high pasture before the coughing took her, and the only thing of hers I had was a little ewe she had carved from apple wood when I was small, worn smooth now, hung on a leather cord at my throat. I touched it without knowing I did it. Dame Orcel, who kept the stillroom before me and kept me after my mother died, used to say I touched the ewe the way other people said prayers. I want to tell you about Dame Orcel, because she is the one who named things. She was past 70, with hands like knotted rope and eyes that missed nothing. And when the rest of us could not say a true thing out loud, she said it for us. She taught me that a burn wants cool water and time, that a lie wants an audience, and that the 2 things a body cannot fake are a fever and grief. And I want to tell you about Sedge, who was 19 and ran the gates and the goat pen and errands too small for the men to bother with. Sedge had a stammer that vanished when he sang, and a way of appearing exactly when you needed a thing carried. He is important later. Nearly everyone is important later. That is the trouble with telling a story from the end. The Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark was named Sigrun, and for the first months of the siege, she was only a banner to me. A gray wolf on a field the color of dried blood, planted on the ridge across the gorge, close enough to count and too far to fear. Kaldrmark had come east that autumn, one hold after another folding before it, and the word that came ahead of the army was always the same. The Warlord Queen did not lose. She did not rage, and she did not boast. She arrived, and she waited, and the wall came down, and she was reasonable to those who yielded and final to those who did not. I did not fear her yet. I want to be honest about that. In the first weeks, I thought of her the way you think of weather in another country. She was a problem for the Castellan. The Castellan was Lord Brannock, and he had held Vharn for 30 years, and he was not a cruel man, but he was a frightened one, and frightened men do arithmetic with things that should never be counted. Remember that. It matters more than the wall. The siege settled in like a long winter. Kaldrmark did not storm us. That was the first thing that frightened the older soldiers, the ones who had seen war. An army that storms is an army in a hurry, and a hurried army makes mistakes. Sigrun's army was in no hurry at all. They ringed the gorge, they took the mill and the low road and the ford. They let the autumn turn and the food run thin. And they waited for Vharn to do their fighting for them from the inside, with hunger. By the second month, the goat pen that Sedge kept had gone from 40 head to 9. By the third, the willow bark was gone, and I was making fever tea from meadowsweet and a great deal of hope. I cataloged what we had the way I catalog everything, because a list is a kind of railing you can hold in the dark. 40 bandage rolls, 2 crocks of honey, a half sack of barley damorcel had hidden behind the false stone in the stillroom wall 3 years before anyone thought there would be a siege, because damorcel had lived through one already, and did not intend to be surprised twice. I tell you this so you understand what we were, before I tell you what walked into it. On the 90th day of the siege, there was a parley. Parleys in that war were a bitter kind of theater. A white banner would go up on the ridge, and a white banner would go up on our gate, and a small party from each side would come down to the flat stone by the ruined mill, and stand in the cold, and say the same 2 things they had said the week before. Sigrun's terms never changed. Open the gate, lay down the iron, and no one inside dies. Brannock's answer never changed either. Vharn does not yield. I was not at the parley. I heard about it after, the way everyone heard about everything, from Sedge, who heard it at the gate. But the 90th day was different because that was the day the child came inside the walls, and nothing after it was ever the same. Here is what I was able to piece together later, from Sedge and from damorcel, and from a Kaldrmark soldier who had reason much later to tell me the truth of it. The Warlord Queen had a child, an heir, not yet 2 years old, a little girl named Isa. The bearer of that child, Sigrun's consort, a woman the Kaldrmark soldiers spoke of the way you speak of a saint you have lost, had died at the very start of the Eastern War, of a fever that took her in 3 days while Sigrun was 100 miles away breaking another wall. So the Warlord Queen, who did not lose, had lost the one thing a war cannot give back, and she carried the child with her army because she could not bear to leave her. And because a warlord's heir left behind is a knife left on the table for anyone to pick up. On the 90th day, under the white banner, there was a raid that broke the truce. To this day, I do not fully know whose fault it was. Kaldrmark says one of Brannock's captains loosed an arrow. Vharn said the Kaldrmark van moved first. What is certain is that the flat stone by the mill became a killing ground for the length of a scream, and in the confusion of it, the child's nurse, a Kaldrmark woman who had brought Isa down to the parley because the queen could not bear to be a full mile from her, ran the wrong way. She ran toward the gate of Vharn instead of the ridge, because the gate was closer and the arrows were behind her, and she was cut down at the foot of our wall with the child in her arms. And one of Brannock's men, thinking he had taken a hostage worth a kingdom, snatched the little girl up out of the dead woman's arms and carried her in through the sally port before the gate slammed. And that is how the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark's only child came to be inside the walls of the keep her army was starving to death. I did not know any of that when they brought her to me. I knew only that Sedge came pounding down the stillroom stair near midnight, white-faced, and behind him 2 soldiers with a bundle that was screaming. And damorcel came up out of her cot in her shift and took one look and said a word I had not heard her say in 9 years. The bundle was a child. She was filthy and frozen, and screaming the particular scream of a very small person, who is understood in the way small people do without words, that the shape of the world has broken. There was blood on her wrapping that was not hers. She had a shock of dark hair, and when she opened her eyes to shriek at me, they were a pale slate gray, the color of the sky over the gorge an hour before snow. The soldiers wanted to leave her and be gone. There was a battle being cleaned up above us, and no one had time for a hostage that could not even be threatened yet. The taller one said the Castellan wanted the child kept alive and kept quiet and kept secret until he decided what she was worth. And then he put her into my arms because I was the nearest woman, and he did not want to hold a screaming child a moment longer, and he went back up the stair. I want to say something first. I had held sick children and dying children, and children not yet an hour old. I had never held a child who was in active war. She fit against my shoulder the way they all do, with that animal certainty that a shoulder is the correct place to be. And she pressed her face into the wool of my dress and screamed herself down to a hiccup, and then to a shudder, and then, terribly, to sleep. And I stood in the middle of my stillroom, holding the most dangerous thing in the west of the world, and I did not put her down. Dame Orcelle looked at me holding her. She looked for a long time. Then she went to the false stone and took out a twist of the hidden barley, more than we could spare. And she set a little pan of water on the fire to make a thin gruel. And she said, well, and she would not say anything else that night. The child's name we learned by accident. For the first 3 days she had no name to us. Brannock's order was that no one was to speak of her, and a thing you cannot speak of has no name. We called her among ourselves, in whispers, the little one. She would not settle for the soldiers who were set to watch the stillroom door, and she would not settle for Brannock's steward when he came to look at her, the way a man looks at a coin, and she settled only for me and a little for Dame Orcelle, and this became a problem for everyone, because a hostage is only useful if it can be handed to someone else. On the 3rd night, she was fever-fretful and would not stop crying, and I was out of things to try, and so I did the last thing my mother's people did with a crying child, which was to sing to it. I did not know a single proper cradle song. I had spent my life in a stillroom, not a nursery, but there was a scrap of a tune in me from somewhere so far back, I could not name it, 5 notes that fell and then lifted. And I hummed it because it was the only music I had, and I hummed it against her dark hair. And she stopped. She went still all at once, her slate-gray eyes wide open in the dark, and she made a small sound back at me. Not a word. She had no words yet, but a shape of sound, the same 5 notes, falling and lifting, answering. I did not think anything of it then, except relief. A tired woman does not analyze the miracle that lets her sleep. I hummed the 5 notes, and she answered them, and we both slept. And I did not understand for 7 months that I had been singing her a song that belonged to her by blood, a song I had no right to and no way to know, and that the not knowing would be the thread the whole thing hung from at the end. And Dame Orcelle said, "Sheep, ew," because that was the sound the child made, reaching for it, a soft 2 notes, Isa, and we did not know it then, but we had stumbled onto her own name, the name her dead nurse had called her, the name the whole Kaldrmark army was grieving as though it belonged to the dead. Isa. We thought we had made it up. We had only remembered it for her. I have to tell you now about the man who counted things. The morning after we found her name, I was summoned to the Castellan. Lord Brannock received me in the muniment room, which was cold and full of ledgers, and he did not offer me a seat, because I was a stillroom woman, and one does not seat a stillroom woman. He was a tall old man gone stooped, with careful hands and a careful voice, and he had a ledger open in front of him, and I understood before he said a word that I was about to be part of an arithmetic. He asked after the child's health. I said she was mending. He asked whether she was strong. I said she was. Then he told me what she was worth. He did not use those words. He was too careful for those words. But he laid it out the way a man lays out a hand of cards he intends to win with, and the shape of it was this. The Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark had one weakness in all the world, and it was asleep in my stillroom. An army that does not lose still has a heart, and the heart of Kaldrmark was a slate-gray-eyed child not yet 2 years old. With that child, Brannock believed, he could buy the one thing 7 months of arrows could not, a lifted siege. He would send word across the gorge. He would offer the Warlord Queen her heir, whole and unharmed, in exchange for the army marching east and leaving Vharn standing. And if she refused, if the Warlord Queen, who did not lose, decided that no single child was worth an unbroken campaign, then the child was still useful. A hostage refused is a hostage that can be shown on the wall. A grieving mother can be made to break against a wall she will not storm. I stood in that cold room, and I understood that Lord Brannock, who was not a cruel man, had just described to me, in a careful voice, 2 roads, and that both of them ended with a child on a wall. I said, "And if she is neither bought nor shown?" He looked at me the way you look at a tool that is spoken. He said it gently. That was the worst of it. He said it the way you'd say the barley would not last the winter. I went back down to the still room, and Issa was awake and reaching for the ewe, and I picked her up, and Dame Marcel watched me do it. And she said the thing she had been not saying for 3 days. She said, "You've chosen a side no one in this keep will thank you for. Not ours, not theirs." She nodded at the child. "You understand there's no wall for that side to stand on." She said, "No, you don't. Here is what the next months were. I am going to slow down, because the siege slowed down, and because everything that mattered happened in the slow part, in the held breath between the 90th day and the day the wall came down. This is the part with no battles in it. This is the part I think about most. The first thing I did was the thing that could have gotten me hanged. I decided that Issa would not be a coin. I did not announce it. You do not announce a thing like that in a keep where the Castellan counts mouths. I simply began quietly to make her hard to spend. A hostage has to be produced to be worth anything, so I made her difficult to produce. I let it be understood through Dame Marcel that the child was sickly and fragile and might not survive rough handling or cold air or a journey across the gorge, which was half true and became more true the more I said it, because a thing said often enough in a siege becomes the truth. I kept her deep in the still room, in the warm, behind the fever ward door that no one wanted to open, because no one wanted the fevers. I made the most dangerous child in the West into the least visitable one. And I fed her. That was the second impossible thing. There were 9 goats and then 7 and then 4, and every drop of milk in Vharn was accounted for, and I stole it. Not all of it. A careful little every day skimmed off the top of the arithmetic. 2 words. He was 19. He understood it faster than the men who counted. In the 4th month, Issa nearly died, and I could not call a single soul to help me. It came on the way fevers come to small children, which is to say between one breath and the next. She had been fat and grave and well in the morning, gnawing the ewe, and by dusk she was a furnace in my arms, slate-gray eyes gone glassy, her breath fast and shallow. And she would not take milk, and she would not wake properly, and she made a thin sound that was not the 5 notes and not anything. And I stood in the fever ward with the most dangerous child in the West, burning up against me, and understood that I could not shout for aid. A still-room woman with a fevered child raises no eyebrows in a siege. A still-room woman with this fevered child raises a rope. If the fever took her, Brannock lost his card, and a man who has lost his card wants to know how, and the how was standing there holding her. So I did it alone, the way I had learned to do the impossible things alone. I broke into the last of the honey, one of 2 crocks, and we were saving them for the dying men. And I told myself the dying men would forgive me and knew they would not. And I made a syrup and got it into her drop by drop off my own finger. I stripped her down and sponged her with the cold well water Sedge brought me without asking why I wanted a whole bucket of it at midnight. I sat with her against the wall of the fever ward through the black middle of the night, and I did the only medicine I had left when the meadow sweet was gone, which was to hum 5 notes, falling and then lifting, over and over, until my voice went to a scrape, and somewhere past the darkest hour, the furnace broke. She sweated through her wrapping and my dress both, and her breath slowed and deepened, and her eyes cleared, and she looked up at me out of the wreck of the fever, and made the small sound back, the shape of the 5 notes, faint as a thread, and I put my forehead down against her damp hair and shook, because a thing you have decided to keep alive is a thing that can be taken from you, and I had just learned exactly how much I had decided. Dame Marcel found us both asleep against the wall at dawn, the empty honey crock beside us. She did not scold me for the honey. She looked at it a long moment, and she looked at the sleeping child, and she said only, "That's the 2nd crock of honey you've spent on her. One was ours, and she meant the dying men, and she meant the whole keep. And I understood she was telling me, in her way, that there was no line anymore between what I was spending on the enemy's child and what I was spending on us, that they had become the same account, and that she was not going to be the one to close it. The nearest I came to the rope was in the 5th month, over an open door. A new man had been set to watch the stillroom stare. The old one had died of the flux. And this one was bored and frightened and curious, a bad braid of things in a man with a spear. And he took to opening doors he had no business opening. One gray afternoon, I came up from the well and found the fever ward door standing open and the new man inside it, looking down into the box cot where Issa slept with the ewe in her fist. And I felt the whole 7 months go thin as ice under me. I did not run at him. De Morcel had taught me that a lie wants an audience and the truth wants none, and that the way to survive a dangerous man is to bore him. So I made myself heavy and slow and cross, the way a tired stillroom woman is cross. And I said without hurrying that if he wanted to stand in the fever ward, he was welcome to it, and that the child had the spotted fever, and that it was catching, and that the last 2 men who had breathed the ward air had gone to the flux inside the week. I said it flat, the way you say a thing you are sick of saying, and I watched fear do my work for me. He looked at the sleeping child the way you look at a snake you have almost stepped on, and he went back out onto the stair, and did not open that door again. And he told the other men the fever ward was a death room, so that for the last 2 months of the siege, the safest place in Vharn for the Warlord Queen's daughter was the one room her own besieger's fear had sealed for me. Dame Orcel, when I told her, laughed for the first time in a month. It was not a kind laugh. She said, "You've learned it then." I asked her what. She said that the truth, told to frighten instead of to comfort, is the strongest wall in any siege. You told him nothing but true things. She is sick fragile. The ward is dangerous. Men have died near it. She shook her head. Brannock counts. You build. I have watched a great many people do a great many clever things in 2 sieges now, girl. And I never once watched anyone build a wall out of true things around a child no one was allowed to love. Don't let it make you proud. By the 5th month, I knew the Warlord Queen better than I knew anyone alive, and I had never once been within a quarter mile of her. This is a strange thing to explain. She was the enemy. She was the reason the barley was behind the false stone, and the reason Sedge's goats were dying, and the reason there was a child in my stillroom who woke screaming. And yet, across those months, I built her in my mind the way you build a person you are watching very closely from very far away, out of 1,000 small true things. And the person I built was not the person the word had promised. I catalogued her the way I catalog everything. I knew she rose before her army, because the gray wolf banner on the ridge turned to face the keep at the first gray light every single morning, which meant someone raised it. And Sedge, who watched from the gate, said it was always her. I knew she did not waste men. In 5 months, she threw her army at our wall exactly twice, both times when a section of it looked ready to fall on its own, and both times she pulled back the instant the cost climbed past the prize. A warlord who does not lose, I came to understand, is mostly a warlord who can bear to wait and cannot bear to spend what she does not have to. I knew she was there in person and stayed, and did not go east to the easier holds, though her captains surely pressed her to. Vharn was a small prize. She stayed for it 7 months. I did not understand why in the 5th month. I understood it completely on the day the wall fell. And once, only once, I saw her. It was the 6th month, at the last parley, the one Brannock called to make his offer, the one that changed everything. And de Morcel made me come up to the gatehouse because she said I had a right to see the woman whose child I was raising. I stood in the shadow of the gate arch, and across the flat stone by the ruined mill, in the thin 6th month light, the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark stood with her helm under her arm, and I saw her for the length of a held breath. She was tall. She had ash-brown hair braided hard off a weathered face, and even at that distance, I could see the scar through her brow. And the heavy iron cuff on her forearm caught the light, and while Brannick's herald read out his terms, she pressed her thumb to that cuff once, slowly, and went utterly still. I did not know yet that the stillness meant she was holding something back with everything she had. I only knew that the most feared woman in the West stood in the cold and did not move, and that when the herald came to the part about the child, about her child, the stillness became something you could feel across 100 yards of ruined ground, like the air before the north wind. I went back down to the still room, and Issa was asleep with the U in her fist. And I looked at her slate-gray eyes, closed, and I thought, for the first time, of the woman on the ridge as her mother, and not as a banner. There was one more thing I learned about her from across the gorge, and it was the thing that undid the last of my hatred, months before Dame Orcelle finished the job. In the 5th month, 3 of Brannick's scouts went out the postern by night to try the Kaldrmark lines, and 2 came back and 1 did not. We assumed the one was dead. It was what happened to men who went over the wall. But 11 days later, he came back, walked up to the gate in the gray dawn, thin and limping and alive. And the story he brought with him ran through the starving keep like a fever of its own, because it made no sense. He had been taken, not killed. The Kaldrmark van had him cold, a Vharn man out of the walls in the dark, worth nothing alive and a nuisance to feed, and by every law of that war, they should have hanged him on the ridge where we could watch. Instead, they had brought him to the Warlord Queen, and she had looked at him, a half-starved boy who had come out to count her fires. And she had asked him 3 questions about the state of the keep, and he had answered none of them. And she had not had him touched. She had fed him. She had kept him 11 days on soldiers' rations, better than anything inside our walls, and then she had turned him loose in the dark below the postern, with his own knife back in his hand, and a single sentence, which he repeated to us word for word, standing in the gate with the frost on him. She had said, "Go and tell them the gate still opens the same way it opened yesterday. No one who lays down the iron will be harmed. I am not in a hurry, and I am not cruel, and I would rather feed this keep than break it." That has always been the offer. Brannick had the man flogged for coming back with enemy words in his mouth. That is the kind of thing a frightened man does with a mercy he cannot use. But I sat in the still room that night with the enemy's daughter asleep on me, and I turned the sentence over and over. I am not cruel, and I would rather feed this keep than break it. And I looked at the child I was feeding on stolen milk, and I understood that the woman on the ridge and I were, in the one way that mattered, doing the same impossible thing from opposite sides of a wall. She was trying to take a keep without killing what was inside it. I was trying to keep a child alive inside a keep that was killing itself. We had never spoken. We were already the only 2 people in that whole war who wanted the same thing. And we did not know it. And there was a wall and an army and 7 months between us. The 6th month parley was where Brannick made his offer, and where the Warlord Queen answered it. And the answer was not the one anyone in Vharn expected. Brannick offered the trade, the child for the siege, her heir, whole, carried out under a banner, in exchange for the army marching east and Vharn left standing. And the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark said no. I heard it from Sedge, who heard it at the gate, and I did not believe it, and then Dame Orcelle confirmed it. And I sat down on the still room step because my legs would not hold me. She had said no. The one weakness in all the world offered back to her, and she had said no. For a whole day, I hated her. I want to be honest about that, too. I sat with the child she would not ransom, and I hated the woman on the ridge with a completeness that frightened me, because I thought I understood it, and what I thought I understood was that Vharn had been right about her all along, that she was iron all the way through, that a campaign meant more to her than her own blood, that she had weighed her daughter against a road and chosen the road. It was Dame Orcelle who made me stop. She let me hate her for a day. Then on the 2nd night, she sat down across the fire and she said, "Think, girl, you've watched that woman for 6 months. You told me yourself she doesn't spend what she doesn't have to." I said, "It meant Vharn stands, and her daughter comes home." Dame Orcelle said, "That's what it was worth to Brannick." She held up a knotted rope hand and counted on it, the way she'd taught me to count what we had. 1. She sends men down to take the child under a banner. Who carries the child up the gorge? Vharn's men. Who chose the moment? Brannock. The last time there was a banner and a child on that stone, the child's nurse was cut down and the child was stolen. I did not answer. 2, said Dame Orcelle. The moment she takes the trade, every hold from here to the sea learns that the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark can be moved off any wall in the west by putting a child on it. You've watched her not spend men. You think she'll spend that? She lowered her hand. Those are different things, girl. One is a woman who doesn't love her child. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, if she's decided to save her by winning, then she's decided to take this wall no matter the cost. Dame Orcelle looked at me across the fire, and for once, she did not have a harder thing to say. She just nodded. And that was the night I stopped raising a hostage and started raising a child whose mother was coming for her, across a wall with an army, and would not stop. I need to tell you about the small things, because the small things were the whole of it. Isa grew that winter the way children grow, which is to say all at once and when you are not looking. She learned to stand by pulling herself up the leg of the stillroom table. She learned that the fever ward door meant safety and the stair meant strangers, and she would go quiet and grave the instant a boot sounded on the stair, a siege child's wariness that broke my heart. She learned 4 words, and the first was not mama, because she had no mama to say it to. The first was Io, for the little carved sheep, which she called E, and which she would not sleep without, so that the worn applewood ewe my mother made for me passed to the daughter of the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark. And I let it. I catalogued her too, the way I catalogued her mother. The 2 catalogs began, without my meaning them to line up. Isa pressed her thumb against things when she was thinking. The edge of the table, the rim of her cup, the carved U, pressed and held. I had seen a woman press her thumb to an iron cuff across 100 yards of ruined ground. Once, slowly. I told myself it meant nothing. All children press things. Isa's slate-gray eyes went utterly still when she was frightened, instead of wide, a stillness far too old for her. And I had seen that same stillness on a ridge in the 6th-month light. And Isa answered the 5-note tune. Always. Every time. I hummed the falling lifting scrap of music that I had carried out of nowhere. And her whole small body would settle, and she would answer it back. And by the 7th month, she could hum the whole shape of it herself, off in a corner to the U. And I thought it was a thing we had made together, our tune. And I was proud of it, the way you are proud of a private language. I did not know. I want to be clear about how completely I did not know. I thought I was teaching her a song. I did not understand that I was giving her back the one thing of her mother's she had left, and that I had it because, as I learned at the very end, my own mother, the shepherd on the high pasture, had come down out of the Kaldrmark uplands as a girl before she ever came to Vharn, and had carried that cradle-song out of the same hills the Warlord Queen was born in, and had hummed it over my cradle, and I had carried it, meaningless, for 24 years, until I hummed it over a slate-gray-eyed child in a siege and it walked home. I do not want you to think those months were only fear. They were also the happiest of my life, and I did not know that until they were over either. There was a way the light came into the fever ward in the late afternoon, through the one high slit of a window, a bar of it that crept across the floor, and Isa learned to chase it. She would haul herself up the table leg and totter after the moving light with her hands out and fall down and laugh. She had a low, surprised laugh, as though laughing were a thing that kept happening to her by accident. And I would sit with the days mending in my lap and watch the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark's daughter chase a bar of sunlight across the floor of a dying keep, and for the length of that light, I was not afraid of anything. She learned to walk in the 6th month, 3 staggering steps between the table and my knees, and the first thing she walked to was me, and I have never been given anything before or since to equal it. She learned her 4 words, Iwe, up, no, and a sound that was almost my name and never quite reached it, so that I was called by a soft broken syllable that belonged to no one else. She would press her thumb to things and go still and grave, and then break into the surprised laugh, the two halves of her mother that I did not yet know were her mother, and I catalogued them and loved them and did not read them, because you do not read the child in front of you as though she were a letter from someone else. It was Dame Orcelle who read them. I said all children press things. She said, not like that. That's a grown woman's habit in a baby's hand. And she looked at me until I had to look away, because I had seen a woman press her thumb to an iron cuff across 100 yards of ruined ground. Once, slowly, and I was not ready to say it out loud. That was also the night the barley ran out. Dame Orcelle went to the false stone for the last of it, and found the last of it was gone. And she stood with her knotted hand flat against the empty place in the wall for a long moment. And then she turned around and did a sum out loud that I will hear for the rest of my life. She was not angry. She said it the way you close a ledger you are glad to be rid of. Well, it is spent on the right thing. And she wrapped the empty oilcloth back around nothing and put it behind the stone again, out of habit. And we did not speak of the fact that with the barley gone, we had perhaps a fortnight of anything at all, and that the wall was leaning further out over the gorge every dawn, and that the held breath of 7 months was very nearly out. Sedge kept the last 2 goats alive on spite and grass, and I have to tell you how, because it is the part of the siege I am proudest of and had the least to do with. By the 7th month, there was no grass inside the walls that had not already been eaten. The only grass left grew in the strip of dead ground below the murder holes, between our wall and the first Kaldrmark trench, a no-man's strip a spear's length wide that neither side would cross by day and both watched by night. Sedge cut it anyway. He would go out through the murder hole in the black before dawn, with a sickle and a sack, flat on his belly in the frost, and cut the enemy's grass a handful at a time to keep 2 goats alive to make a cup of milk a day for a child the enemy would have given a hold to hold. And he never once, in all those weeks, seemed to find that strange. What I did not know until the 6th week of it was that he was not alone out there. There was a Kaldrmark boy on the other side, a goat boy like Sedge, set to watch the strip. And the 2 of them had found each other in the dark the way 2 19-year-olds who would rather tend animals than kill each other will. And they had come to an arrangement that no captain on either side would have survived hearing. The Kaldrmark boy let Sedge cut the grass. In return, Sedge left him things at the 3rd murder hole. A twist of our failing willow bark for the boy's chilblains, once a scrap of Dame Orcelle's soap, and the boy left things back. And one gray morning, Sedge came down the stillroom stair with his sack and set it down, and there on top of the grass was a small hard cheese and a screw of dried apple, and he said without his stammer, "He says it's for the little one. He says everybody knows there's a sick child in there." I sat down on the stillroom step and I could not speak for a moment, because it meant they knew not who she was. If the Kaldrmark army had known their heir was alive in Vharn, the war would have ended in an afternoon. But they knew there was a child in the dying keep, and the word that had come down through that whole army, from the woman on the ridge who had fed a captured scout and turned him loose to be the proof of it, was this: feed the child. A goat boy in a frozen trench was passing dried apple through a murder hole to a starving keep, because his queen had made her army into the kind of thing that would, and I was catching it and giving it to her own daughter, and none of us knew. I gave Isa the apple that night, softened in the last of the milk. She pressed her thumb to it and went still and then broke into her surprised laugh, and I hummed the 5 notes, and she answered them. And somewhere out beyond the wall, a whole army settled down to sleep around a woman who wanted the same thing I wanted, and did not know I was alive. I have thought since that the war was already over by then, in every way that mattered. It only took the wall a few more weeks to agree. By the 7th month, the keep was dying. I want you to understand the dying, so that you understand what it cost to keep a hidden child alive inside it. The barley behind the false stone was gone. The goats were gone, but for 2 that Sedge kept alive on hope and grass pulled through the murder holes. Men had begun to die of the flux and of the cold, and of the particular despair that comes into a besieged place when everyone has done the arithmetic, and no one will say the answer out loud. Dame Orcelle worked herself gray. I worked beside her, And in the deep, warm heart of the fever ward, behind the door no one would open, a child who should not have existed grew fat and grave and whole, on milk we stole and love we could not afford. And every day that she thrived was a day I was, as de Morcel had promised, standing in the open. Brannock had not forgotten her. That was the crisis, when it came. He had let me hide her for months, because a hidden card is still a card. But on the 200th day of the siege, the north wall began to fail in earnest. A whole section of the curtain, undermined and frost-cracked, leaning out over the gorge a hand's breadth more each dawn, and a man who is about to lose stopped saving cards. He sent for me on the 200th day. The muniment room was colder than ever, and Brannock had aged a decade, and this time there was no ledger open, which frightened me more than a ledger would have. He told me the wall would fall within the week. He told me he had one card left to play, and he meant to play it before the fall took the choice from him. He was going to put the child on the wall, not to trade. It was too late to trade. He was going to show her on the failing north wall in the last parley, and he was going to make the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark a promise. Storm this wall, and the first thing your army finds in the breach is your daughter's body. Hold your storm, and she lives another day. He would buy days. He would buy days with a child, one day at a time until the days ran out. And then he would spend the child too, because a card unspent when the keep falls is only a card the enemy takes for free. He told me to have her washed and dressed and ready at dawn. I said no. I had never said no to the Castellan. A stillroom woman does not say no to the man who holds the keep. But I stood in that cold room, and I heard myself say it quietly, the way de Morcel had taught me to say true things. And I watched it land on him like a stone in still water. He said I would do as I was told, or I would hang, and the child would be handed to men who would do as they were told and be less gentle about it. And there it was, the whole trap of it. Because he was right. If I refused, I would hang, and she would be taken anyway, and taken by hands that did not love her. My refusal alone saved nothing. That is the cruelest kind of choice, the kind where being right changes nothing. And I had spent 7 months learning that the honest road and the useless road can be the same road, and that you have to walk it anyway or become the thing on the wall. So I did not refuse alone. I did the harder thing. I want to say something first about that night, because it is the hinge of the whole story and I have never told it plainly. I went back to the still room, and I did not weep, because there was no time to weep, and I sat down across the fire from de Morcel and Sedge, and I told them what Brannock meant to do at first light, and then, between the three of us, in the last night of the siege, we decided that he would not do it. I could not save Isa by keeping her hidden. The hiding was over. At dawn, the men would come down the stair for her, and I could not save her by refusing, because my refusal alone only changed whose hands carried her up to the wall. There was exactly one thing left that might keep her off it, and it was not clever, and it was not safe, and it was this. Outlast the night, the wall, the north curtain was failing. It leaned further out over the gorge every dawn, undermined and frost-cracked, and de Morcel, who had lived through a siege before and counted better than any Castellan, believed it had a day left in it and no more. If it came down before Brannock could carry the child up to it, if the Kaldrmark army was through the breach and into the keep while Isa was still deep in the warm and the dark of the fever ward, then she would not be a hostage on a rampart when the sun rose. She would be a small found thing in the deepest room of a fallen keep, and the ones who found her would be her own. It was a terrible thing to hope for, the fall of the wall that had kept us alive for 7 months. I hoped for it with my whole heart. So we did not run. We waited, which is the hardest thing there is, and we made ready to meet the one moment we could not plan. Dame Orcel got up and she went to the false stone, and behind the empty barley place there was one more thing hidden, wrapped in oilcloth. A Kaldrmark soldier's gray cloak, taken off a fallen man at the mill on the 90th day and kept by de Morcel for 7 months, because de Morcel did not intend to be surprised twice. She put it in my hands, and she told me what it was for. She said, "When they come through the breach, and after tonight they will, do not let them find a Vharn woman clutching a child in the dark. A Vharn woman is an enemy, and an enemy in a breach is not looked at twice. Wear the gray. She held my eyes across the fire. Speak her name, Isa, and then be still and let the child do the telling. It is not your word they will believe, girl. It is the little one's face. I did not fully understand the last of it. Let the child do the telling. I understood it completely 6 hours later, in the gray, with the water not yet boiled. Sedge took the first watch on the stair. I put the folded gray cloak under the box cot where Isa slept with the U in her fist, and I sat with my back to the warm wall of the fever ward, in the deepest room of a keep with a day left in it, and I did the only thing there was to do. I hummed the 5 notes, low, into the dark, and the child answered them in her sleep, falling and lifting, and I waited for the wall to decide which of us the dawn belonged to. The wall did not last the day. It did not even last to Brannock's dawn. The North Tower came down in the gray hour before proper light, all at once, the way a thing that has leaned too long finally goes. I felt it in the floor before I heard it, a deep shrug through the whole cliff. And then there was a sound like the world clearing its throat, and then there was shouting, and then there were the boots. I had water on the fire. I remember it with a foolish clarity. I had set water to warm for her morning milk, and it had not yet reached a boil when the keep began to come down around us. Sedge fell down the last of the stair 3 steps at a time, white to the eyes, and said one word, breach. And then, because he was Sedge, he did the only useful thing in the world. He pressed the goat's last cup of milk into my hands and said, feed her. Whatever comes down that stair, let it find her fed and quiet, not screaming. He was 19. He understood it faster than any man who ever counted. Brannock's men never came for her. They had a keep falling on their heads in a breach full of Kaldrmark iron, and one hidden card at the bottom of a fever ward was the last thing in any of their minds. The wall took the choice out of Brannock's hands the way it took everything else out of them. I have thought since that it was the only clean mercy the whole siege ever did anyone. It fell before a frightened man could do the last frightened thing. I got the gray cloak around us both. I got the milk into her, drop by drop off my finger, the way I had all through the fever, and she took it and pressed her thumb to my wrist and went grave and still at the noise above. And I hummed the 5 notes against her dark hair to keep her from crying out, and she answered them, faint, falling, and lifting. And we waited in the deepest room of a fallen keep for whoever the boots belonged to. They came down slowly, at the end, a great many of them, and none of them ours. And I stood up with the child bound to me under a fallen enemy's gray cloak, in the middle of my stillroom, with the water not yet boiled. And I did the thing de Morcel told me. When the doors opened, I did not run, and I did not plead. I opened the gray cloak so they could see the little one's face, and I said the only word that could save both our lives. I have never seen an armed hall go so quiet so fast. The doors had opened, and it was not the soldiers I saw first. It was her. She came down through her own men without a word, and they fell back out of her way without being told. The Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark, taller than the men around her, ash-brown hair braided hard off a face that had not slept in a week, the scar through one brow, the heavy iron cuff on her forearm. The woman I had built for 7 months out of a banner and 1,000 small true things, standing at last 3 feet from me in the deepest room of a keep her army had just broken. Seeing her whole for the first time, I understood that I had built her almost right. She had come to take a keep and count the fallen. She had come down to the deepest room first, I think. The way you go to the worst place first when you have already lost the one thing a war cannot give back, to find her heir's small body and have it over with. She had not expected the fallen to be breathing. She looked at the child in the enemy's arms, and something went out of her face, and something else came into it, and she did not move. That is the thing I have never been able to explain to anyone who was not there. She did not snatch her. She who had waited 7 months and lost the one thing a war cannot give back, stopped 3 feet away with her hands open at her sides and did not take her own daughter out of an enemy's arms. because the child was afraid. Isa had woken to a falling keep and a room full of iron and a tall shape coming out of the smoke, and she had gone still, that old, wrong, grave stillness, and pressed her face into my shoulder and taken a fistful of the carved U at my throat, and I felt her whole small body lock. She did not know her mother. She had been 10 months old when her nurse carried her down to a parley and never carried her back. To her, the woman in the doorway was one more stranger in a morning full of them, and she hid from her, in the arms of the enemy who had fed her, and the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark saw her own child flinch from her and did not force it. She went down slowly onto one knee on the stillroom floor, to be smaller, her thumb pressed once against the iron cuff on her forearm slowly, and went still. And she looked at her daughter hiding from her, and at me, and I watched the most feared woman in the West understand that she could take her child by force and win nothing. And I watched her decide in the smoke not to. Instead, she did the only thing left. She began, very low, in a voice wrecked to gravel, to hum, 5 notes, falling, and then lifting. I stopped breathing. She hummed the tune, my tune, our tune, the scrap of music I had carried meaningless for 24 years and hummed over this child for 7 months. And Isa went rigid against me, and then her head came up off my shoulder, slow slate-gray eyes wide, and she looked at the stranger in the gray light, who was making the sound that meant safe, and she made the sound back. The same 5 notes, falling and lifting, answering, and the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark broke. Not loudly. She did not weep the way you would think. Her open hands closed and opened once, and her still face came apart very quietly. And she looked at me over the head of the child humming her dead consort's cradle-song, and she said, in that wrecked voice, the 3 words I have never gotten free of since. Here's what happened next. And it happened slowly. In the smoke. In a fallen keep. In front of an army. I understood when she hummed the tune. The thing I had not understood for 7 months. The song was hers. It was Kaldrmark's. The cradle song of the uplands she was born in. The one her lost consort would have hummed over the child. The one that belonged to Isa by a blood I had no part in. And I had it because my mother, a shepherd girl, had carried it down out of those same hills before she ever came to Vharn and had hummed it over my cradle, and I had carried it, a meaningless scrap all my life, and given it back to the one child in the world it was made for, without ever knowing whose it was. The Warlord Queen understood it before I did. I saw her hear a Vharn stillroom woman humming a Kaldrmark cradle song, and I saw her do the arithmetic of it, the one impossible sum that came out to this, that of all the arms in all the world her orphaned daughter could have fallen into. Inside a keep, her own army was starving. She had fallen into the arms of the one enemy who already, by an accident older than the war, carried her mother's song. Some things are too large to be chance. I do not know what to call it. She did not try to name it either. She said, "You kept her," and I could not answer. And she saw I could not, and she did not make me. She reached out, not for the child, for me. Her hand came up slow, giving me every moment in the world to refuse it. And she laid her palm along my jaw, her thumb at my cheekbone, the iron cuff cold against my neck. And she looked at me the way I had spent 7 months learning to read her across a gorge, and there was nothing final in it at all. There was only a question, because she could have taken us. I want to be clear about that, at the end, the way I have tried to be clear all through. She was the conqueror. I was an enemy woman standing in a keep she had just broken, and by every law of that war I was hers to do with as she pleased, and her daughter was hers to take. She could have had us both by simply closing her hand, and she did not close her hand. She pressed her thumb once, slowly, to the cuff and then to my cheekbone, as though the 2 things were the same vow. Come to Kaldrmark, not as spoils, not as her nurse. Come, because you choose it. And Isa, between us, tired of grave and grief, reached up out of the gray cloak and took a fistful of the carved applewood yew at my throat and pressed her thumb to it and hummed her 5 notes. And I looked at the two of them, the child with the slate gray eyes and the woman with the slate gray eyes, both of them still now and not afraid. And I closed the last of the distance myself. I put my forehead against hers. That was all. That was everything. After 7 months of a held wall and a held breath and a held child, I crossed the last 3 feet of open ground on my own 2 feet and rested my forehead against the forehead of the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark, with her daughter humming between us. And I said the only word I had. The siege ended the morning the wall did. I have thought about that a great deal. When the North Tower came down and the Kaldrmark army came through the breach, there was no last stand and there was no sack. The Warlord Queen's terms had never changed in 7 months. Open the gate, lay down the iron, and no one inside dies. And the moment the breach was hers, she held her army to them to the letter, because she had a daughter somewhere in that keep, and she would not have her found in a burning one. Brannock, who woke to a fallen wall and an army in his halls, and the one card he had meant to play gone from the fever word, did the arithmetic one last time, and, being a frightened man and not a cruel one, arrived at the only sum left. He laid down the iron. No one inside died. Dame Orcelle and Sedge walked out of the fallen keep into the gray morning, and Sedge's stammer did not come back for a week, and the first thing he did was go and find the 2 surviving goats, because Sedge kept the goats. They came with us to Kaldrmark. Dame Orcelle said she had lived through 2 sieges now and intended to spend the rest of her life somewhere that had already lost its war. She keeps a stillroom in the uplands that is better stocked than any I ever kept in Vharn. And she still says the true things no one else will say. And she was the one, in the end, who found out about my mother, who sat me down a year after and told me she had asked among the old upland women and learned that the falling lifting cradle song was 300 years old in those hills, and that a shepherd family had gone down to the Western March a generation back, and that the whole tangled, impossible thread of it was only this: 2 women from the same hills, one who carried the song east and one who was born to it, and a child who needed it, and a war to bring them together in the one place none of them should ever have met. She said it was the nearest thing to a reason she had ever been able to find for any of it, and that I should stop looking for a better one, because there was not going to be a better one. And a song that walks home across a war is reason enough for anyone. I have stopped looking. Some nights when the wind comes down off the high pasture, I think I can almost hear the shape of my mother in it, and I hum her 5 notes back into the dark. And upstairs, a slate gray-eyed child answers them in her sleep. And that is the only reason I need. Isa is 3 now. She has her mother's slate gray eyes and her mother's trick of going still, and she is not afraid of very much anymore. And she sleeps every night with a worn applewood yew that a shepherd carved for a different little girl on a different high pasture a long time ago. She calls me by a name that is not Mama and is not Nurse, and is entirely her own. She calls the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark by no title at all, and her mother, the Warlord Queen of Kaldrmark, keeps the vow she made the morning the wall fell, which is a strange thing to watch a warlord do, keeping. She is still the woman the word promised, out on the marches. She does not lose. She does not rage. She arrives and waits and is reasonable to those who yield. But she comes home, and when she comes home, she stands in the doorway of a warm room and presses her thumb once, slowly, to the iron cuff on her forearm, and looks at the 2 of us by the fire, the child with her eyes and the woman with her song. And something goes out of her face, and something else comes into it. The same 2 things I saw come into it in the doorway of a stillroom on the day a wall fell. And she says the 3 words that decided my life, that I can answer now. And she crosses the room and lays her open hand along my jaw, thumb at my cheekbone, and says the thing she has said every homecoming since the day the wall fell. the thing that is the other half of the vow, the thing that is the whole of it. If you want to know what really happened between them in the seasons after the wall fell, the parts I couldn't show here, the full uncut chapter is waiting on my Patreon. You'll find the link in the description. She says, "Now I keep you."